Sobanan, if someone told you you would be a CEO 5, 10 years ago, what would you have said?
I don't think I would have believed them. I think that 5 or 10 years, so 10 years ago, I'd have been 18. So I was just starting, 19 even. So I would have been just starting medical school. 5 years ago, you'd have had a higher likelihood of convincing me because I'd literally been a year out of prison and like I was on that entrepreneurship journey. But yeah, 10 years ago for sure, no way.
So growing up, what was your aspiration? Was it to be a doctor?
Yeah, so throughout schooling, I was really good at academics, but really didn't like the way the system or the world was. Like, I think I had this really strong, like, I don't want to just call it a class consciousness, but almost like a social issue consciousness from a young enough age that when I was good at school, I was always wonder like, how could I best use my brain for like the goodness of like helping people or serving. And yeah, medicine was the thing that I came upon just because biology and chemistry always came naturally to me.
And then you enrolled at university. Was it Plymouth, down on the south coast?
Yeah, so I got into Plymouth University when I was 18 and yeah, Southwest. So literally furthest Southwest, apart from Cornwall, you can go in the country, I guess, yeah.
How was that settling into Plymouth? Very different to London, different demographic.
Yeah, entirely. Funny enough, I was talking to someone who was from Scotland today about this, and I feel like Plymouth is this like weird element of the UK where like poverty is really high, deprivation levels are like insane. It's one of the only places that still have epidemics of syphilis. Teenage pregnancies have one of the highest rates are in Plymouth. And on top of that, when you consider stuff like, you know, I used to do placement in bloodborne viruses clinic, and like class A drug use among parents who had kids in school were much higher than the rest of the country. But like that was, I guess, the like quantitative data centric kind of stuff around the health issues. But on like a personal experience, it was the first time I ever experienced racism in the UK. Like I think it was on my first week in Plymouth that people would literally put their windows down and shout every sort of obscenity you could think of. And I never thought that the UK was racist up until that point. So like growing up in London, I was very much in a bubble of, oh, people are lovely to each other, everyone's diverse and everyone's inclusive, and yeah, we make jokes about each other, but you know, no one actually means any harm by it.
Did you ever react? Did you bite back if that was your first experience of racism at, I guess, 18, 19 years old?
I initially, so the first few instances I didn't bite back. It was more of a, oh, this happened. Like there was one guy who'd like make that, there's like an Indian song that, I don't know, it's maybe the only Indian song that like these guys had in their head, was like, you know that like when they do the drums like dun, 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 like that, they put their windows down and they were shouting that out, and then the driver I think shouted curry muncher and like drove past, and it was almost like you're like, wait, was that directed at us? And then we're like, oh shit, we're the only brown people in this like street or area. So those times no, and then but there were instances like, you know, where you'd be in a club or you'd be somewhere else and like a bouncer would pick on you or like do something to you specifically where you would say something, but that was more of a like in the moment because you're both intoxicated, but also because like in those moments you just want to have fun and forget about these things, and it's not being allowed to happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. So at university, I went to Sussex down in Brighton.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, British universities, they are rife with party drugs. Everyone's taking drugs. It doesn't matter what university you're at, whether it's Cambridge, Oxford, or kind of up in Scotland, wherever it might be. People are 17, 18, 19 years old, enjoying themselves. And one of my next door neighbours in my first year when I was living on campus, he was a dealer, and kind of everyone I knew, they'd collect their drugs off him. There didn't seem to be any repercussions, and it's just kind of commonly accepted that university students will enjoy party drugs.
Yeah.
Well, did you experience this at Plymouth University, where people like taking recreational drugs for partying and?
Yeah, so good question. I think great point. Great little prologue on British universities. But so one of the interesting things was like smoking weed in London was considered very normal, right? So I think we started smoking around 15, 16, and it was considered like almost like, you know, we didn't go to the pub here. So it wasn't like first time I started going to the pub outside of like cricket or football in the clubhouse type sense was like at university. So where the traditional young person across the rest of the UK is drinking at 16 or 15 at their local pub, the average person in London tends to be smoking weed. And taking this into university, I used to have the assumption that all the party drugs, so I guess the drugs you're discussing, to me were considered like, if you did the party drug in London, you're considered a crackhead. Like there was a very clear distinction of like, weed is okay. cocaine, MDMA, LSD, mushrooms were all bad drugs, stay away from them. And then when I went to Plymouth, in my medical school year, there was a lot of like gap year students, right? So students who are 1 year, 2 years, 3 years older than me. And they were like affluent, young, middle class, I'm not gonna call them professionals, but I guess students at that point. And, mums are doctors, dads are dentists. They've like gone to private school. They've been educated at that sort of like upper level. So I remember the first time I tried MDMA, it was literally my mate in medical school turning around to me saying, if you try this, it feels like winning the lottery. And I'm sat there like, I trust you. I think you're a reputable young human. So do you know what? I'm gonna take a punt on this, right? Like I've taken a punt on cannabis, and like far less qualified people at that point in my life, my peers were telling me that it's a good idea. And then like the research around cannabis showed me it was. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna listen to you, have a look on the internet, see where I land. And then I remember trying it and just being shocked, going, I didn't know humans were capable of such like, I don't know, elevated emotion, whatever you want to call it. Euphoria, right? And that was what like led me into that journey. But like as I became more immersed in that journey, more I realized that more privileged students, so especially those who are from like, I guess privileged backgrounds, like from well-off families who didn't have to worry too much about money or rent at university, they were the ones who were most into party drugs, and that tended to be the majority of my medical school year. Whereas those from less affluent or working class backgrounds didn't participate in that, primarily, I guess, due to the cost of some of these substances, as well as the fact that they saw university as a great opportunity to knuckle down and change their families' futures. So yeah, I guess it was quite an interesting almost tension there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you mentioned something at the start was kind of the class differences. It's kind of like class is such a taboo topic in the UK. We have the most structured class system, and it's represented in kind of people's accents, postcodes, the type of schools they go to, the universities. Did you experience Did you experience that when you went to Plymouth? Kind of separation in the classes. Did that manifest itself at all?
Yes, so for me, it manifested itself much younger, and then like Plymouth was almost this emphasis of it, like in practice, I guess, at that level, which helped me to understand the layering of society in a way. But so when I was in primary school, went to a state school, then in secondary school, my parents made me take the 11 plus, right? And so got into like private schools, grammar schools, like the whole bunch. And during that, I'd go in for these interviews, right? And you'd go into a grammar school with a swimming pool, or a private school that had its private tennis court or a rugby field. And I was like, oh, wow, like, schools like this exist. And at that age, I knew I didn't want to go to a grammar school. My parents were like, everyone in that community is telling you this is what's best for you, so have a go at it, basically. So I went to Queen Elizabeth's Boys' School. So it's a school in Barnet, like meant to be one of the best boys' schools in the country. And grammar school, but you had to do 2 sets of exams to get in. And it was one of the most weirdly traumatizing experiences of my life, that as a 12-year-old going into year 7, I think really changed the direction of my life. So I stayed there till year 9, and it was like there was a draconian system of ties have to be a certain length, tuck in your shirts. If you had a camera phone, you got a Saturday detention. If you had to wear vests and short shorts to athletics, or you had to wear Speedos in the swimming pool, like very, very, you had a PE bag, that the only PE bag that was allowed by the school to be brought in, right? And this just messed with my head, I think, because in my head it was like, why am I being forced to do all of these things because I've passed a bunch of exams? It's almost like I'm being punished for doing well type thing. And there would always be tension with teachers. So like if you'd question stuff, it was almost like, who are you to be questioning me? Don't question me. It was almost like these negative traits were being encouraged to create what I call QE boys now is a grades factory. I know loads of people who got great grades, went to Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, wherever, but I know loads of unhappy people who felt like they never got the chance to build real relationships with other human beings or with the opposite gender or whatever. And but what I found really interesting was like the way different classes were taught is that if you were a kid from a very privileged background, middle class family, upper class family, you knew how to navigate these environments. So these kids might have been doing drugs from when they were 12 or 13 or 14 years old, but they knew how to present themselves to the teacher and communicate in a way that wouldn't get them into the same trouble that it got me. And I found that really interesting because I didn't know at that stage in my life to go like, okay, don't tell the teacher how you actually feel about them, because that's gonna ruin so many more moments of your schooling career than that point. Or like, there's a gain to this school thing that I'm just not seeing at this point. So when I left QE and I went to a state school, my general happiness went up, but I started to realize that in a state school, you're almost given this like free market. He literally said like, do what you want, like don't break the law too far, and like people, the level, the threshold for what's considered bad behavior is completely different. And I think that was my first awareness of it. And then university just really emphasized that, because people who were from these more privileged classes often had a very different experience of finances, had a different experience of like how they interact with lecturers, and also like simple things like at home, I'm used to saying like Amma and Abba means mum and dad, right? I'm used to saying to an older person, saying auntie, uncle. I've gone to uni now, and you've got a 55-year-old woman saying, oh, you can call me by my first name, you call me Stephen, or call me Nikki, or call me whatever. And I'm sat there like, this feels really uncomfortable. I've been saying sir and miss for the last decade, right? And all of these little nuances then change the entire experience for me. So yeah, class consciousness is definitely a weird taboo that we don't speak about enough.
Yeah, it's definitely a big taboo in this country. So going back to university, like I was saying, party drugs super normalized. In Brighton, people are taking drugs in front of police and they don't care. I'm not necessarily saying that's a great thing, but I'm just saying that's what it is in Brighton and other cities. You ended up going to prison for conspiracy to supply cannabis.
Yes.
How did that all start?
So in the first year of university, so I went to university with my best mate, like a few other friends from London. We all like shared a house from first year, so we didn't have to stay in halls, right? And the commitment was made when we went to university that we were all going to stop smoking weed. We're going to have a sort of clean slate. That fell apart like literally on day one. And then as time went on at university, finances always were a struggle. So you have your student loan, which is about 1.3K that exists over 3 months. Parents would help out with rent. And then you'd have these moments of like, where we're eating toast for dinner. Or like, I remember my best mate took a bunch of pizzas from Domino's because he was like, just saw them lying on the counter and was like, okay, everyone needs to eat, let me take them. And like, these moments were really, I don't know, I guess like there's a trauma to it, right? Because you're sat there with your closest friends in a house, you all don't have money, you don't understand how to get more money at that point in your lives because you're so young. And then you've never been like, those, I guess, survival skills aren't there. So you're just trying to do what you know how to do from growing up in the environment you do. And then we all used to experiment with different things. So like, I used to experiment with sort of like more technology or business related stuff. And then my best mate was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to get 7 grams of weed and see if I can sell it. And then this then just started to build up and spiral. And then when you brought, I guess, like my business know-how with my best mate's love for cannabis, it kind of spiraled into what it became. But it wasn't, conspiracy to supply cannabis makes it sound like, I don't know, like a massive thing, right? But it wasn't. It was like, it was just university students trying to make their way. We weren't going to be Pablo Escobar overnight, but it was something that helped to keep people fed, keep that financial safety that was required at that point in our lives. It helped to provide that.
Yeah, definitely. So during this process of kind of this experience you just explained with your friends, was there any kind of anxiety in the back of your head that maybe something along the line could happen in terms of the police getting involved or whoever the university finding out?
Great question. I think the answer is no. So I think there wasn't a single thought in my head that the police or the university would find out and it would be severe consequences, because I'd never seen that before for anyone else, if that makes sense. Like coming into university throughout first year, met a lot of people, as you described, who are selling party drugs, selling cannabis, selling whatever. And it was considered the norm, right? And you'd see it in university halls. Like it wasn't considered, I don't know how to, it's weird to say it wasn't considered illegal, but it was like university was that point in the British society, or that point in a British young person's development where, drug policy doesn't apply or drug regulations don't apply. And that was very much the culture and sentiment of the university we were at, our peers. So that never appeared in my mind as a real consequence until the arrest happened, or until we were actually in trouble.
Do you know how the police cottoned on to what was happening in the house?
Yeah, so there was one of my best mates, like someone he'd sold cannabis to, had basically been robbed at knife point. The people wanted to know where he got the weed from, so they pointed to my best mate's house. When they pointed best mate our house, and then when they pointed to our house, these guys tried to come and rob the house. Neighbors called the police, we called the police, and then police came that day, and then they'd come to do regular victim support checks. But the whole house smoked weed, and the police were aware of this throughout these points. And when they used to come and do these victim support checks, we would literally sit with them. They'd say, the house smells of weed. you guys should get some incense. Like, we don't mind you smoking weed in the house, but just don't smoke weed out there. Like, they were very measured humans at that point. And then there was this third or fourth time they came over that this other kid who got arrested with us was in the house. And he was in my best mate's bedroom. And when they walked in, they were just like, who are you and what are you doing here? And then he just started being suspicious, I guess. And then they were like to him, are you hiding anything? And he ended up going under the bed and pulling out a shoebox of cannabis to give to them. And then that's how they cottoned on.
God, so was this your first year during freshers?
No, we got arrested in our second year, but it was like 4 months into our second year, so like January of second year.
What was that like, being arrested?
So I think growing up in London, depending on like the circles you grow up around, and I think like, when I say growing up in London, I should like class like being a working class kid in London, right? And a working class kid who like, you're not like locked in your home, I guess, in a way. You see police and you interact with police probably way more than you should at that age. So coming home from school, you know, police are likely to ask you, what are you doing here? Or like, they're likely, you will feel like you realize there's an adversary there that could get you in trouble for X, Y, or Z. And I remember like the first time I got arrested, I was 16. So I got arrested for possession of cannabis on my 16th birthday, like a week after my 16th birthday party. First time we're trying cannabis. And like, I remember that whole experience. We were what, 15, my best mate was 15, rest of us were 16. And it was like, to go through that at that age, then desensitizes you for this age, right? Because now I'm like 21 or 20, and then it's happening again. And all I'm feeling is that feeling of like, I don't know, an injustice in a way, which I know sounds really weird, but I think I agree with literally most common laws, if not all. But I think drug policy is a single area of society that could do with a lot of reflection.
100%. So you get arrested. How long was the process from the police finding out to you actually ending up in prison?
So we were on bail for 20 months. So I think it's important to say, like, throughout the process, we were like 7 months till we were charged. Then when we were charged, 20 months from the charge to the conviction going into prison. And so during that time, it was like 3 trials. 1 trial was a collapse trial, 2nd trial was a hung jury, and then 3rd time convicted.
20 months?
Yeah.
What was your mental health like? 20 months of potentially going to prison. How were you doing?
So it built a lot of resilience. I think for me and my best mate, brought us really close together because we were like, okay, cool, through this, we have each other and we kind of need to sort out what the rest of life looks like. Acknowledging that it could go either way, I think was important because yes, it was being taken to trial. Yes, like we felt like, we had a fighting chance, but at the same time, there was this weird acknowledgement that like, I'm very much against the system defining you or like any institution being able to go, okay, you're this, that means you can't do X, if that makes sense. So almost like, it was like time to plan and like figure out what the rest of life was going to look like. So we used to try random things, like we started an esports channel, like randomly playing 2K and FIFA and stuff back then, and like posting that on YouTube, got like 300,000 views on the video, got really excited, started campaigning about cannabis legalization as well. And like people who were medicinal cannabis patients, like across the UK, would get in contact and get my best mate to visit their MP with them. And that was super interesting because it just showed the level of, I guess, connection that people had with this issue. Wrote a book on how to end the war on drugs that my best mate then presented to jury at the 2nd trial, which was really interesting. It was like our first time of like trying out legitimate business together in multiple ways. Like, whereas like I'd done it individually for a period of time, it was the first time we'd come together and gone like, okay, like what can we do to sell bucket hats from China, or what can we do if we're making video content or whatever. And so that really helped with the mental health because then we'd have the opposite routine. So like we would both like do very late nights, go to the gym at night, and then during the day just work on what we were doing, get part-time jobs to make things sort of work. Because I remember that's when my best mate became a delivery rider. And what did I do? I used to like work in Betfred or fundraising for Greenpeace, just random odd jobs, but really character building, I think, is the best way of putting it.
That's so interesting. I can imagine going through that situation would just completely consume someone with anxiety. They wouldn't leave their room. They'd just be thinking, shit, what's going to happen? But it sounds like it kind of put you on the straight and narrow. Gym, side hustles, mental resilience. So that's quite unusual. But what was it like when the judge's hammer went down and said you are actually going to prison?
In that moment, the only sadness or disappointment I felt was like for my parents at the time, because like I think for a parent to go through that with a child, especially that if I go through that with my child, I think it's very different to my parents going through that with me, because in their heads, like, you know, they escaped the civil war, came here, worked really hard, built this life, probably have never seen an eighth of cannabis before, probably not even understanding the culture that working class kids from minority groups have in London, and then seeing their kid there, it was like they would have just seen their baby in the dock ready to go to prison. And I think that really broke my heart. Outside of that, I think there was a level of like, I was the type of kid, right? Like, you know, when you said you couldn't do something, like that was like, I'm going to go and do it type thing, right? And I think that was the moment for me. When the judge banged this hammer, outside of the sadness and heartbreak for my parents, it was almost a mental fortitude that came from just knowing that, like, no, I'm gonna go to prison and make sure prison is the thing that builds me, and I'm gonna make sure that this entire experience is like what then propels me, and I'm gonna do it for my family, my loved ones, for every single person that cared about me and was with me through this. But ultimately, to show people, like, even a guy in a wig banging a hammer doesn't define your fate, even if you can lock your way for a period of time. And I think that like mental fortitude was really important in just helping me like through the entire experience.
What was your first nights like in prison?
So my first night was not the day I was sentenced. The first night was the night before. So the day before my sentencing, the judge refused to let me go home. Don't know why, but I think it was just almost like, I don't know, maybe he was worried I was going to go back to London or something and they were going to have to come pick me up and just didn't want to deal with the hassle of it. But he remanded me for a night and I was put in a cell with this scouser who, for some reason, decided to package drugs in his anal cavity and come to court in the morning. But that is a whole set of decisions that I remember asking. He was like, I came back from holiday, they arrested me at the airport and then whatever. But he was really nice. He was just like, we were talking and he was like, I think the judge is just trying to scare you. Like, I don't think you're going to jail tomorrow. Like, but he was like, if you want to make sure, write an apology letter. And he gave me a ripped up like piece of his letter paper that they give you and said, write it on here, this, that. And I remember just sitting there going like, okay, no, this guy's been through it. It makes sense. And then, yeah, obviously, like that was what. And then the next day, and then I remember I asked the medical staff for Zopiclone, which is like a night sleeping drug. Because I remember that day was like, obviously sleeping that night was always going to be difficult. But I think it was just like in my head going like, okay, cool. If I stay awake this whole night, it's going to be 10 times more torture. And I'm also going to be like, not a very good cellmate because this guy's first night in prison too. And I'm not trying to just sit at the edge of my bed, like, worrying all night, if that makes sense. So yeah, and then next morning got up and went to court.
Wow. Was it HMP Exeter you went to?
Yes, HMP Exeter.
Well, what's HMP Exeter like? Because that is... So I've interviewed people who have gone to prison, but they've all been kind of London-based. So
Yeah.
Wandsworth, Brixton, Wormwood Scrubs. Exeter is known for being a very middle-class, very calm, gentle area, very predominantly white.
Yeah.
What's Exeter prison like?
So there are jails in this country that the government should shut down. Exeter is for sure one of them. It's a Victorian prison, like somewhere they used to literally hang people. So I remember one of the wings literally was like, the officers was going like, oh, one of the last hangings were done here, like that type of stuff. It's like a derelict building. It's disgusting. It's dirty. It has a smell, like hospital smell to it. Broken windows. Like, I'm just literally recollecting my memory, like almost like it's like looks like a castle from the outside. Inside looks like a rotting crack den. Like I think is the best way. The prison itself is like so prison staff, it's a losing battle to manage a prison like that because you have prisoners from all over the country who come into that one prison, and then you also have like how can I describe this? Almost like some of the like levels of trauma that people experience in there, couple that with officers who mostly aren't well trained enough to be able to manage that trauma, coupled with a lack of resources. So like we were wearing the same clothes and prison issue underwear for 5 days. We'd have to wash our clothes in the sink. The first suicide was 5 days in. Like you're hearing, imagine you're in a cell and you've got a cellmate. Your cellmate's hung themselves in the middle of the night. You've woken up for whatever reason, maybe go to the toilet, whatever. You've seen your cellmate hanging and you're banging on the door, like screaming for help. And the officers can't open you up on their own, because they've got to wait for backup to come. Backup might be another minute, 3 minutes, whatever. And you can only imagine that level of trauma that comes from all you do is you turn around, you see your hanging cellmate, and in front of you is you banging at the door and no one's coming to open it. And that was like, stuff like that was really, I don't know, it was traumatizing for me because I think you're sat there and you're aware how little human life means as soon as it's been given the stamp, if that makes sense. And I remember still the story of the guy killing himself was like, because his missus said he can't come and see his kids, and he'd been spent like the last 6 weeks making soap sculptures for his kid's birthday. And it was like, in my eyes, like, I think if we had a better criminal justice system, all of these things are preventable. But where you have prisons like Exeter that have failed multiple inspections, been under notice from the government, whatever, but they still have to exist because we have too many prisoners to shut them down, I think says a lot. But yeah, for anyone curious about Exeter, I say visit it. It is atrocious. We had a broken window for ages. You're given like this little orange blanket with loads of holes in it. There was like 7 days it had no running water. Toilets wouldn't flush, anything, because people were smashing up cells. And you can only imagine what it's like where two men live in a cell. They can't flush the toilet. They can't brush their teeth. They can't shower. The only running water is from a hot water tap. And yeah, it's one hell of an experience, that's for sure. But yeah.
So you're 20 years old. You've been studying to be a doctor at university.
So I was 21 by the time I got to prison. Irrelevant.
You must have felt so out of place in prison, being surrounded by all sorts of people. It's so unusual for someone who's studying to be a doctor to be surrounded in an environment like that. How was that? Did you feel like you had to put on a mask to almost come across like a bit different?
So again, very, very good question, very interesting question, because I felt like I went to prison and I was like, I'm gonna be myself, right? And I think I've grown up as someone where like me and my best mate, we would chill with like people who'd smoke crack, like people experiencing homelessness from quite a young age, like 14, 15. I remember me and my best mate after school, don't ask why we did this, but we would literally go into Tesco's, decide that would be a good idea to shoplift, and then give the shoplifted goods to a homeless guy who wanted to eat, and then literally sit with him in an alleyway, have a cigarette with him while he was eating the food, and we would just sit there, have a pancake or something, and just laugh. And like, we always found connection with human beings regardless of their background. So, and what's really interesting, it only took me a few days to get over that whole medical student or doctor prisoner label and like the identity stuff, because I hadn't changed, right? Even though I was in prison issue clothing with a prison number and whatever else, like, I was still me. And I think that was a really profound thing for me. And then like in prison, you get people of like, and I'll call myself someone of privilege for sure, like working class background, but I was at university, never had to worry about, you know, being raped by my parents or being abused by my family or getting shot when I was walking home from school. Like that wasn't the norm for me. If that was like the anomaly that would happen where, you know, wrong time, wrong place, wrong people type thing. Whereas like, I think the thing that made me think was like, I just went in there to be me, but a lot of people with privilege would be like, I'm better than you. You could feel it. Like the guy who was the accountant who committed fraud, or the lawyer who had been done for a sex offense, whatever it was. They had this mindset of almost like, I'm above what's going on over there, right? And you could feel that. Like guys could feel it too. Like on the wings in general population, like you'd get like that vibe of going like, oh, cool, like he doesn't chat to anyone because he actually thinks that, oh, he's somehow above us even though he's in here with us. And so I would literally like, initially me and my best mate kind of kept to ourselves, but people just came to us and they showed us a lot of love. Like, you know, like being a South Asian guy or being someone with coloured skin, like we need lotion, right? Now, if you don't you can't take lotion into prison more often than not. So, you know, first day we have to get lotion of someone and we're trying to find someone, and there's like another brown guy where he's like, oh, giving us lotion in this plastic spoon. And then like people come and be like, oh, like, have you guys eaten? Like, are you guys okay? Like, do you guys need anything? Whatever. And I think because we weren't trying to be someone who people could take advantage of. So like, if someone came up to us and was like, do you want to borrow some spice or do you want to borrow some drugs or whatever? We'd have said no, right? Like we had the common sense. But if someone was like, oh, do you want to come to the library or do you want to go out on the yard and exercise for a bit? We'd be like, yeah, of course. And then we built a lot of friendships and we found that we had weird mutual friends with people. Like one guy went to school with my ex-girlfriend's best mate and we would have lived like, say, a 5-minute drive from each other, but we're meeting in prison. And then like after my best mate left to go to a new prison, he became my cellmate. And it was like those weird connections appeared, but I think it only happened because you kind of have to take people for who they are in those moments, right? And that really helped.
Yeah. Was there a racial segregation at HMP Exeter? Where, kind of like America, different groups?
Exeter for sure. And I think it's really important to say none of the other prisons I was in. And so apparently Exeter's like this, northern prisons are like this. In Exeter there was the 3s, the 2s, the 1s, right? That's how Victorian prisons tend to be laid out. So they're all landings. Now, on the 3s is like the newbies on the wing. So they're what you call like induction cells. There'll be like people be there for like maybe 3 or 4 nights, and the rest are normal cells. And then the 1s and the 2s are like people who've been there for a while. What was really interesting is on our wing in Exeter, the 3s and the 1s were primarily British white or white other men. And then the 2s were all like ethnic minority groups from across the UK. And what we found really interesting was like the guys from the white communities, and not all, but a large enough proportion, would go out of their way to be almost like racial bullies in moments where they could and to who they could, which I think is very important to say. So like, whereas like me and my best mate don't look like your typical, I don't know, gangster or typical person involved in criminality, they would go like, push in front of us in the survey queue or go out of their way to do things that they knew that if we said something to it would lead to a fight. And like, but we also didn't care enough to go, okay, I'm going to fight you, get a few extra days of my sentence and whatever. But the guys on the 2, so the guys from ethnic minority backgrounds, especially the ones from like London, Birmingham, Manchester, if they saw this happen, they would go out of their way to literally tap the guy on the shoulder and be like, bro, would you do that to me? If you're not going to do that to me, why are you doing that to them? And then make like, even at times, one guy threatened to rob, I used to wear glasses back then, threatened to rob my glasses. And the guy literally held him up and was just like, you're going to apologize. And remember, if you come and you do anything to him, like you're going to do with me. And this wasn't anything, we didn't ask for anything. We didn't go to these guys and say, please, can you look after us or whatever. They just went, they used to call me doctor and my best mate P, and they'd be like, both of you are kids who shouldn't be here. You're here because of a racist criminal justice system. We're going to make sure you don't come out worse than you came in type thing. And I will forever have love for the people that did that, because I say this, like, in there, we're nobody, right? We're just some university students who are arrested for cannabis and sent to prison. In there, these guys are somebody. They belong to gangs. They've committed crime. This has been their lives since they've been in school. And for them to show us that level of love and respect and like just being caring and compassionate, I think says a lot about how we paint characters in prison versus the reality of who they actually are.
Definitely. Is there a particular prisoner who left either like a really positive or negative mark on you? Is there one character that you specifically remember?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say the positive and actually the negative. And I think both are actually... So one of my best mates now, I'm not going to say his name because I don't know whether usually when we record it, like people don't like people saying people's names, but like literally lives in Birmingham. He's one of my like closest friends now, and this guy would make sure like I've eaten. He'd make sure he'd make my bed. He would tell me that I couldn't go to see my mom and dad with a non-iron clothes because I didn't know how to iron clothes back then. If I'm going to be honest, like 21, I hadn't had to iron clothes till that point, and like little things, and like even going out of his way to just go like to make me feel included, if that makes sense. Where it's like, in there, people might have smartphones, they might have drugs, they might have whatever, but going out of your way to make someone feel like they're a part of that community, even if they're not involved in whatever you're involved in, I think says a lot about your character as a human, and never expecting me to reciprocate a legal act. So like, if I borrowed his smartphone to have FaceTime my mom and dad or FaceTime my ex or whatever, he would never ever go, okay, because I did that for you, you owe me with this. He would just go like, bro, like, yeah, like you can have that for a while, like whatever. And I think I'll forever, forever have a place in my heart for that, because I think that's a really altruistic thing to do for another person. And then the worst, there's a few prisoners that fall into this, but there's a demographic of prisoner who commits what you call crimes of passion. So these tend to be affluent men who end up murdering their wives, murdering their children, could be like just a girlfriend, just murdering someone close to them. And we, in our, like, I guess criminal law, we call it a crime of passion, right? That moment they flip, they found out their partner was cheating or their partner was going to leave them, and they just kill partner and kids. These guys were the well-to-do and, I don't know how to say it, palatable members of society. Your ex-banker, your ex-lawyer, your ex-whatever. When you go into prison and if you met them, you'd think, this guy is nice. Like, what a nice guy. I wonder what he did. And then you wish you never knew, because you'll learn what they've done and you'll go, okay, wow, like you're capable of that. And it's not clear. Like, it's not clear from when I know you or see you or speak to you or anything. And it just makes you aware that, it just made me really aware of, like, I guess that in spirituality, Buddhism, Hinduism and stuff, they talk about like, we all have this, like Carl Jung says it as well, like the shadow self, or this idea of like, we have this negativity in us and it's almost up to us to manage that and build a virtuous life around it. Whereas people who superficially build a virtuous life, they have the job, they have the money, the partner, the kids, whatever, they're always at one point from cracking and then doing horrible harm upon other people. And I think that left an imprint on me on just like be very cautious about how you choose to conduct yourself in this life, because that one moment and everything can go wrong, and you wouldn't have even known why that is unless you've chosen to reflect on how you could react or respond in those situations.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Prison, we're stripping humans back to the bare bones, and you see the best and the worst in people.
Literally, I think it's the easiest way of putting it, yeah.
Sobanan, you mentioned that, was it you or your friend who had written a book about the war on drugs and legalization?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on it? And the second point is, have you ever heard of someone called Neil Woods?
I haven't heard of Neil Woods, but tell me who Neil Woods is before I answer the question. I'm very curious.
I'm going to have to show you his book.
Okay,
Neil Woods, he's a former undercover cop in the UK during the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And he would be sent out to become friends with homeless people in Leicester, Brighton, Portsmouth, Plymouth.
Nice.
And he'd try and work his way up the chain to meet the big boss, buy drugs off him as evidence, and then the police would come in and bang them up.
Fascinating.
After 20, 30 years of doing this, he became so traumatized and realized the system is so screwed up with the war on drugs. He's written all these books about how we should totally rethink it and about approach legalization, regulation. It's really cool. I'll send you some, I'll send you his book after. But yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of legalization and drug policy in general?
So I think that wars on abstract concepts or tangible objects are like in itself like a political move that has never paid dividends. Like whether it's the war on terror or the war on drugs, I think there's so many parallels you can draw. And if we look at the history, like look at what Richard Nixon or his aides talk about in the sense of like it was very easy to criminalize certain communities through the criminalization of drugs. That criminalization then led to what we see as structural inequality today. And drugs aren't the cause of structural inequality. They're one of, and when I say drugs, I'm specifically referring to drug addiction. So alcoholism, addiction to tobacco, addiction to other substances are a consequence of structural inequality, not a cause of it. And I think that's the thing that people get very wrong on certain elements of the political debate. It's so easy to blame someone, to go, it's your responsibility, you chose to do this. Very hard to empathize and understand the context that leads there. I think the war on drugs is what keeps our criminal justice system funded, alive. Like if we consider how much drugs brings to the UK economy, and then we consider who's criminalized for those drugs, I can assure you it's not the people at the top of the food chain. Being in prison, it's all the people at the bottom of the food chain. It's the traumatized kids. It's the young man with mental health issues who is very easy to manipulate in the local area. Like I met in Guy's Marsh, for example, there were 700 or 600 prisoners. Out of that, I met probably 5 or 6 high-level drug dealers who weren't foreign nationals. And then, drugs, firearms, human trafficking. We as a people, or the government, has chosen to interlink these areas, because if you legalize drugs, then drugs are one of the major funding sources for organized crime. Legalize drugs, you chop off a leg off the beast, right? But then you can really focus on human trafficking. You can really focus on weapons trafficking. But by focusing and bringing in drugs into this mix, it becomes almost very commercially viable for organized crime groups, but also you end up mixing these ethics of going like, now prostitution and human trafficking becomes easier because you can now drug them with the illegal drugs that you also supply and sell. And there's a lack of, I think there's a lack of foresight and a lack of self-awareness in the successive governments who've failed to even look at the war on drugs and go, okay, how do we change this to stop more people dying and to reduce the amount of trauma that exists?
Yeah, completely agree. I've said this in previous interviews, but I think we're such a conservative nation when it comes to drugs and drug policy and drug reform. We just lag behind so many different cultures and countries. Do you think we'll arrive at a point where kind of politicians will be debating regulation and the end of this kind of war on drugs in the UK specifically?
So, I don't know. My hopeful answer is yes.
Yeah.
My honest answer is I don't think the UK will, the UK is the largest exporter of cannabis in the world. Like I discovered this in the same year I was in prison, right? I'm sat in prison watching a Channel 4 news segment going, the UK is the largest exporter of cannabis in the world. G&W Pharmaceuticals have been pioneering this since the 90s. And I'm sat there going, damn, I'm in jail. That penny drop moment happens so many times. It's like we compare the US and the UK and we say the US was almost a child of the UK. We had a son and it turned out the way it did, Uncle Sam, right? And look at the US, and I'm not saying we should have legal guns and firearms and all that, but the companies who are involved in manufacturing weapons are allowed to manufacture weapons in the UK, but God forbid a British citizen was to get a hold of them, right? We're willing to sell them to the Saudis, whoever, any side of the table, but we're not willing to acknowledge our role in these geopolitical conflicts. I think it's the same with drugs. It's like there's rules around cannabis plants, for example. So you can keep up to 10 to 12 cannabis plants in your house if you call the police and you tell them and you tag the plants. Now, if I was a privileged white professor at Cambridge, I'm going to trust the police. I'm going to call them, tell them about the 10 plants I have in my shed that I use for my Parkinson's or whatever. And then they're going to come around, they're going to tag the plants, say thank you and how good a job I did and whatever, and they're going to leave. But if I'm a young black man on a council estate and I've got 10 plants and they're just for my personal use because my mum's sick, am I going to call the police? Probably not. And the laws have been almost designed in this way where if you are privileged enough, you will understand the way they work and you'll understand how you get to use drugs and also get away with it. If you're not, you won't. And I think that's the reality of the UK is we exist in this very structured class society, but we're not willing to show people the realities of social mobility. I think someone I met ages ago said this, like they had a partner who was whose family were aristocratic, and they were saying when they went to visit the family, they gave them a warning saying there's a way to butter your bread, and if you don't butter your bread in the way that you're meant to butter your bread, my grandma will judge you. And I'm sitting there thinking in my head, like, wow, like they really thought about this, like to the point of buttering your bread. And I think for me, a big part of like why I choose to be the way I am or live the way I do is like, I think we need to be very willing to acknowledge and break down these barriers and have honest conversations, because if we don't, we will live in a society where, you know, I think it was like the Minister for Drugs in the UK government's husband was also involved in the major export for drugs. Look at what happened with the COVID masks. Like these very backdoor corruption, if what we're going to call it, because that is what it is allowed to happen because not enough people get up and go, do you know what, fuck it, it doesn't matter if I lose my job, I can say that I smoke weed and I don't think it should be illegal. Fuck it if I lose my profession, because doing the right thing is more important and being honest and truthful is more important than choosing to like adjust to a sick system. And I think that's what the UK is. I think the UK specifically, the US in some ways, is a very sick system, and I think it's eating itself from the inside out. And we're seeing this in every single public institution, the NHS, to the criminal justice system, to the job centre, and we're seeing it in our people too, right? Reduction in positive health outcomes, quality of life going down, mental health going up. And it's really important that good people, honest people are the ones who stand up and have these conversations, because I do not imagine an MP who lives the life they do ever choosing to have these difficult conversations in Parliament, because it's too much of a risk, right? Like it's too risky, and God forbid that ends up as a mark on their CV.
So well put. Sobanan, I love speaking to people like you because you have these full circle moments.
Yeah.
Aspiring doctor, ended up going to prison, come out the other side, and now you're the CEO of Breakthrough Social, helping young kids, not just in London, but across the country. In a nutshell, what do you guys do as a company?
So we help not just young people, we also help people. So the youngest people in our cohorts can be anywhere up to 19. We've worked in PRUs as well, all the way up to the oldest person in our cohort can be 63 to 65, I think is the oldest that we've actually had. So what we do is we bridge the gap between today's talent and tomorrow's industries. We recognize that AI, the metaverse, blockchain, the creator economy is going to totally reshape what society looks like. So we don't focus on getting people into the national economy and contributing to that. We focus on the digital economy. How do we get the most underserved communities in the UK and abroad into the digital economy so they can participate, which in what I consider to be the greatest economic revolution of our time, of at least the last few centuries, right? For the first time, you can have the use of a PhD assistant at your fingertips. You can access an economy of transactions that occur anywhere on the planet and actually look at what's going on. And we want to teach people how to do this. So we run a 12-week program, which is sort of our flagship program. That's a skills boot camp to help people to move into these industries, get jobs or set up their own businesses. But we also do self-paced online courses with the UN, with the AI for Good initiative, looking at how do we help underserved communities across the world adopt AI and AI skills. So yeah, in a very short nutshell, it's really trying to make sure that the future of society, the future of humanity doesn't look like the past where small groups of people are allowed to benefit at the expense of the many.
Brilliant. Sobanan, I'm going to link a link for websites down below in the description.
Nice.
It's brilliant what you're doing, and yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you.